All right, welcome back, everybody, for our final segment in this summit. We're joined by Manny Sandoval. She's the account executive at Lex Reception. Lex Reception is an answering service that answers calls through email, chat, and phone. They have a massive, essentially a call center, but a distributed remote call center. And we'll have Manny explain more about Lex Reception in a moment. But I just want to mention before we get started that, as promised, we're not here to sell you anything. There's no solicitation, no pricing conversations. This is about best practices and intake. Manny and her team are our partner in answering services because we know that many members in our program don't have Spanish-speaking services or resources to answer these calls. So Manny is the best person to talk to about this topic. So thank you for joining us, Manny.
Oh, thank you for that great introduction.
Yeah,
I can go tell my kids I'm cool now.
Yeah, you're cool. You're cool. We love you, Manny. We've been working with you since I think 2018 or 2019. And so tell us a little bit, just briefly, about the value that attorneys get from Lex Reception.
So we have dedicated legal receptionists, and they support your firm 24/7, 365. So of course that's holidays included, in both English and Spanish. And what we try to do is strive to give attorneys and their staff time back. They need a lot of bandwidth to do what their jobs require, and they can't do that if they're on phone calls. And then when they're on phone calls, if the prospective new client hears distraction in their voice, you may not have higher lead conversion. So that's where we come in, to provide an empathetic voice for those callers calling in.
Got it. So you provided to some collateral here. I want to talk about the bilingual intake basics, namely on scripting. So this is one of your first bullet points here. What is the biggest difference in customizing scripts for the general market and then for Spanish speakers?
For Spanish speakers, it's very important to speak en usted. It's a formal way of speaking because with Spanish, there's so many different origins that speaking en tú, which is informal, it sometimes can be rather rude, just depending on what the origin of Spanish is. So that's one of the main differences between the scripts, and we call them guided scripts. You don't want a verbatim or a transactional script. That is very off-putting. It does have to be personalized so that whomever is taking your calls can sound a little bit more organic.
Yeah. So would you say that it's not like scripted sentences, but more like talking points?
Yes, and also instruction. A lot of instruction. So everybody has to be on the same page.
Okay.
Right? This is the information you need to collect. This is how you need to make the person feel, right? They need to feel comfortable. And what's your call for action? What are we doing at the end of this call? So everybody has to be on the same page. And so that's why I call it a guided script, because the person taking the call, you need to give them the autonomy to make sure that they are confident enough to ask a question how they see fit.
Yeah, so I'm curious. So just for those that aren't familiar with the tú and the usted concept, can you just recap the difference? In Spanish, there are two ways to address people, in the tú form and the en usted form. So can you just go further in about that?
En usted, it's ¿cómo está? ¿En qué le puedo ayudar? It sounds
And
a
that's
lot better.
translated to how are you? How can I help you?
And so with speaking that in Spanish, it's almost, I guess the equivalent would be of how you doing?
What's
Instead
up?
of how was your day today? How's it? How you doing? What's up?
Yeah. Like
¿Cómo estás?
what's cracking?
Right, exactly.
What's cracking? What you up to today?
Not something you want to do when somebody's trying to hire an attorney. Not at all.
That's interesting. I mean, so just in the most extreme form, the tú form is how's it going? What's up? And the usted form is how's your day going? Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so you found that being a little more buttoned up in Spanish, more formal, is a better approach when answering phone calls.
And it's more respectful.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, so now let's say you have a dedicated phone number in Spanish. So a Spanish speaker sees a Spanish ad, they call in, And the third bullet point in here, it says that you want to note their language preference and that you don't want to assume their preferred.
Right.
Let's get further in about that. The phone answer, the intake person answers. Walk us through how we navigate that assumption.
Right. So if you'd like us to answer or have somebody to answer in English, that's great. But the person answering needs to be able to speak both languages.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, if the person, sometimes they have a heavy accent. That does not mean that they want to speak Spanish with you.
Right.
If they want to speak English, then you continue that call in English. I'll give you an example. My mother is from Bayesa, Chihuahua, right? And she migrated to the United States at the age of 14. She speaks English. She wants to speak English, and everything she does is in English, even though her first language was actually Spanish. And I don't want to be offensive and assume that she wants to speak Spanish because she's clearly speaking English to me. So if that person asks you if you have, Espanol or is asking you to speak to somebody in Spanish, okay, then you start speaking Spanish back. Sí, claro, ¿en qué le puedo asistir? Instead of just going right into it and assuming that they want to speak Spanish. That can be rather offensive.
I mean, we haven't even talked about getting phone numbers, emails, case situation. We're just at the stage of just having, boundaries being set.
Right.
Whereas in English, there's just there is a common approach to answering phone calls to maintain some professional integrity. But in Spanish, now you have another layer to think about. It's like, which version of Spanish are you speaking? Now you need to ask which language they prefer to talk in or to have the conversation in, because they're speaking a language that isn't the primary language in the United States. So there's all these implications and kind of empathetic approaches that you need to go after before you even start the actual intake. So that's interesting. So let's talk more about what happens after that, because I would imagine takes about a minute. That's a minute of the intake already. And
honestly, that's seconds.
Okay,
this is what the training that your personnel needs to have, right? And so they'll be able to recognize very quickly, this person is speaking English to me. I'm going to continue speaking English. They want to speak Spanish. Let me start speaking Spanish. That's within seconds. That's the training of the person answering the call.
Got it. Yeah, that's wonderful. So now in terms of intake structure, asking about case details, or rather event details or claims, like how do you approach that differently in Spanish than you do in English, or do you approach it different at all?
So thereafter the intake, it's exactly the same. Mm-hmm. The first thing that you have to have your staff practice is what's called active listening. So they should have a notepad around. We have it integrated into the guided script at the very top, because you mentioned the first minute of the call. It's actually the first 20 to 30 seconds of the call. Somebody will tell you at least 3 pieces of your qualifying intake. I saw your ad on Facebook. Mm-hmm. Los encontré en Facebook. I really need assistance because I'm getting a divorce. So right there, the herd. You know the source, the case type.
Right.
Then at that point, in either language, now you start asking some questions. I'd be happy to help you with that, provide maybe an empathy statement. I'm sorry you're going through that. Let me start by gathering your name. And from there, the human element continues throughout the call. That remains the same. And then what also remains the same is the technology. The technology needs to be the same as I mentioned before. Everybody needs to be on the same page with the technology as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned the approach of empathy versus a transactional phone call.
Yes.
We have to correct for this a lot for members in our program, especially when they just start. We do like secret shopper calls where where we put in a lead and then we call in and we see how they initially manage intake. And call center jobs are difficult. They're a grind, especially when you're doing a lot of phone calls. So it's natural that people sort of get soft in their ways, or they don't treat each call a little complacent. And so it just ends up being very transactional and impersonal. And I've seen it cost a lot of business for a firm, just by not taking a few more seconds to just treat the conversation like what it is, a human issue, a very sensitive issue.
Right.
How do you audit? I mean, how regularly, like, for attorneys that are working with third party calling services like yours, or if they have their own intake, how do you recommend, like, what's the process you guys recommend to audit that? Because that's a really difficult thing to manage.
hmm I think in-house hire people who care. As you mentioned earlier in the summit, call recordings are sometimes a yes, sometimes a no.
Yeah,
Right? And you may not have the time to be listening to recordings. So if it's in-house staff, hire somebody who cares and understands the value behind each call. Um,
right.
I would even go as far as giving them the cost per each call, because if that staff member knows the importance of how many thousands of dollars you can use, I mean, you can lose by not properly handling that call, then the urgency is set much higher. Now, with
Yeah,
hiring a service, we have our in-house quality assurance programs that we follow pretty strictly. What people need, though, is a relationship with their supervisor or manager. They need that close attention because legal calls are difficult. They really are. And to be able to maintain that sense of empathy and active listening, it does become difficult. It absolutely does. So we have them on smaller teams so that they have, if they need a break, or if they need to speak with their manager, they absolutely can. And I suggest that in house as well.
yeah,
Understand that the calls are heavy. Sometimes somebody's calling about a death, and
yeah.
and and as an empath, that can take a toll on you.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't think this is spoken of about enough in intake, because we always talk about what the intake person should be doing, what they should
Right,
be saying, what tools they should be managing, and rarely do we talk about like how heavy of a job it can be.
right.
If you're
What about
here,
the human?
yeah, I mean, if you're hearing about car accidents all day,
hmm
or workplace grievances, harassment,
Exactly.
and you think that that person shouldn't be checked on regularly, you think that that person might not check out of their job. It's another layer of management, I think, that isn't spoken of about enough. And it's not to suggest that people in intake are soft or anything, but we have to address the reality that they're
Right.
having really difficult conversations 90% of the time, and that may result in quality of the call suffering. So audit those calls, and just know that if someone's, I would say, would you agree that if someone's not doing great at intake, there's probably other things going on as a result of the volume of calls they're taking?
Right. There could be quite a bit of things going on. Now, as far as the training of that person as well, it is so abrasive to go in there and say, here's what you need to do, here's what you need to ask, here's what you need. That's a lot on a human being.
Yeah.
But rather prepare them and train them well. Like I mentioned, the human element of things, but then we have the technology piece of it, which is
Mhm.
vital, because that's what's going to keep that person from being inundated with too much work. So if that call is handled properly, where the data you're collecting goes directly into your database or CRM, then they no longer have to worry about end of day spending 1 hour just data entry, robotic type movements.
Right.
Also, the technology piece of it, make sure that you have your triggers in place ahead of time so that the people taking the calls can focus on being human, and the automations have been set up in the background to do it for them. For
Yeah.
example, if they've scheduled a consultation for you, you should have your settings already set up so that the person that they scheduled the consult with, the prospective new client, gets their email confirmations, gets their
Right.
email and text message reminders. That takes so much stress off of the person doing your intake, where they can now focus on the empathy and being fully invested in that phone call. And they also have to remove distractions. So if you do have remote employees, which most people do nowadays,
Mhm.
make sure that you let them know, don't want dogs barking in the background, don't want
Right.
people crying, we don't want a large television playing, in the background. We want quiet work environments where the person who's calling in with an unfavorable circumstance is not distracted by all your background noise.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so so intake isn't like the best intake isn't just about having the right process that's
Mhm.
consumer facing. It's the right process for the folks answering the calls, the hard workers, people answering the calls, and those that are managing them, which could be directly an attorney or operational staff.
Mhm.
I do want to get into this next area because we talk a lot about phone, but
Mhm.
Lex reception uniquely does a lot in email, chat, and text as part of intake. What do you think most attorneys most firms that you work with, what are they lacking in these three areas, and what actionable steps can they take today to have email, chat, and text as more of a part of their intake process?
So that's a great question. I think what we're lacking a lot in general is empathy, right? We work in front of a computer. We have access to our phones. Most of the people calling in do not. They could be working at a factory or overnight, and they don't have the time to be calling you, nor do they have the access to a phone to call you.
Right.
Sometimes they will go on your website after they've searched you online or what have you, and they're not in a space where they want people around them to hear what they need to tell an attorney or an attorney's office. So they may use your chat or they may email you. Now, if your contact us form on your website, as you were describing earlier in the summit, is easy to read, very simple. You fill out the name, phone number, what you need help with, submit. It hits your firm. What's your process there? How quickly are you getting to these leads? Do you have an on-call person? Does your form suggest a time to call back?
Yeah.
If so, do you have people available during that time to call back? And
Right.
then for your chat, do you have a chat bot that's a long list of FAQ pre-answered questions that nobody ever actually has those questions? Or are you having someone that answers it live?
It's wonderful. So in terms of we do have a couple questions here. One is from Aaron Lopez. He says, "Do you have any scripts that you can share with us for our intake department?" So Aaron, I'd be happy if you email me, hugo@abogadosnow.com. Tell me a little bit about your practice, what area of law you work in, geographically, etc. Some minor details. I'm sure we can help you out. Happy to send you some starter scripts. And in addition to that, some talking points from today's meeting with Manny. We also have another question here from Joseph Starr. Is there a CRM system that you see works best with your types of phone services? So Manny, I'm going to throw this one to you. CRMs or a dime a dozen, seems like there's so many these days. What are
There are
the products that you're hearing attorneys happy with these days?
all of them, all of the above. And I say that not I mean that
Yeah,
we integrate with thousands. The thing about the CRM is find one that works for you and that is specific to your area of law,
yep,
and make sure that they have an open API that we can integrate with.
yeah,
And then from there, even if you're not using a CRM, we even integrate with databases like Google Sheets. So I would say focus more on if that CRM works for you, and then
yeah.
we'll go ahead and integrate as long as they have an open API.
Yeah, and for those that don't know what an open API is, it's like a connection.
Mhm.
Does your CRM have documentation or the ability to connect with external systems like Manny's, like Lex Reception, for instance? And
Yes.
so, generally speaking, if you ask your support or your account manager at a CRM, hey, we want to connect to XYZ service, they'll likely provide you certain documentation to give to that third party service to connect to. And it's a great way to manage systems and connect systems. And I'm glad you said that, Manny, because I don't think that there's a golden answer. Like, for instance, if you use Clio, it's going to be different than your experience using X, Y, or Z CRM. It's like
My
uh,
case peer, Practice
all
Panther, yeah. Um,
exactly. And,
and you can actually check yourself. If you go to Zapier.com,
mhm,
and then you don't have to register or anything like that. Just go to the search engine, enter the CRM that you're considering,
right.
And then towards the middle of the screen, you can enter Lex Reception or whichever service you're planning on using, and it will actually tell you what it can do. It will say when this happens, say for example, you collect contact information, then this will happen. And it will show you what triggers are available for you free of charge before you even hire a CRM.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great recommendation because it's low effort, low cost, minimum barrier of entry, and you could sort of design your own processes and then get to the point where you say, okay, now I've figured this thing out, I've outgrown it, now I probably need a CRM. Yeah, we're really big on that. Without getting too nerdy about CRM,
Yes,
I call it
can
like,
definitely go down that route. Yeah.
oh yeah, I call it manually creating your processes, and then when you can't manually do it anymore, then figure out the automations.
CRMs are so exciting. I was just talking to somebody. They were telling me an issue that they were having as far as the human error side of things, right? And so
Yeah,
CRMs go so much more when it comes to their triggers and cadences.
yeah,
You can trigger for Lex Reception to push over the data collected, right? Which is exciting in itself because your
yeah,
staff won't have to worry about data entry or yourself if you're a solo practitioner. But then
right,
from there, you can set up a cadence where your task to follow up will automatically be set up.
yeah,
Any email templates that you want triggered, going out, all of that technology, you're already paying for it. You may just not be using all of the triggers and services. So, like you mentioned, contact your account manager and ask for a demo and say, what am I paying for? And help me use
right.
it.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I hope that helps anyone considering CRMs, which is a whole other module by itself. But
Yes.
yeah, try it. You got to kind of try it and figure out what's best for not just for you, but also for your team. Because admittedly, you're probably going to be the one using it the least. It's your team that's going to be using it the most.
Right.
So you have to get them involved. You have to get their buy-in. And again, I think the last point I want to make about CRMs is that the implementation of the technology is the easiest part. It's getting the buy-in from the team and the adoption from the team that is the hardest, because you're making people do something different. We're creatures of habit. We don't like change. So
Agreed.
it's sort of something that needs to be managed delicately. But Manny, so we left Manny's information on the screen. She's Manny at lexreception.com. She has a text number there as well, and even a short URL to book time with her if you want to talk to her about your challenges or what the opportunities are at your office with intake. So Manny, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
This has been wonderful. You're awesome. You're the best. Thank you
thank
so
you so
much.
much.
And we'll chat soon. And we'll just have some final notes now. In terms of this summit, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. For those that joined for these 2 days, thank you so much. We see you on the guest list. And we feel super fortunate to be able to share these insights with you. And for those that have never heard of us and are just joining us for the first time, thank you for giving us a chance. That really means a lot, and it's a privilege to have time on your calendar. We worked super hard putting this event together, and I want to acknowledge the team members that did such. First off, our head of social media, Carol. Then we have Andrea Ferreira. She's our Andrea Ferrer, sorry, our senior account manager. We have Maya Mejia, Mireya Mejia, we have Maria Tamarana, we have Dee, we have Carlos, we have Ali. All of our team members that work under their teams as well were a huge part of the story, of our story, remain part of our story, and were the reason that we put this summit together. So I want to express my thanks to you, my thanks to the team, and to everyone that joined us on this awesome event. This was amazing. It was so fun to put together, and we're going to do it again. We'll be back next month with our normal webinar series, which are typically 30 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on the topic. If you're on our email list, you're going to get an invitation for our next webinar in February. And for those that are looking for replay links, these are only available to Abogados Now members. However, if you email me directly, hugo@abogadosnow.com, I'd be more than happy to get you a replay link. So again, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And again, thank you. Have a great day.